Have you heard about a Kenyan vampire who compared eating human flesh and drinking blood to eating eggs and downing it with coffee? Well, he was a street boy by day, but the human flesh-eating monster by night. This is a chilling case of Kenyan's vampire, Geoffrey Matheri, also known as Fongo. In August of 2008, two young women were rescued from a house in Naivasha's Kihoto slums in deplorable health. The two, Esther Akinyi and Naomi Wanjiru, claimed that they had been kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and drugged by a stranger who drained and drank their blood as they watched. After investigations, police officers in Naivasha arrested a 26-year-old Geoffrey Matheri as a key suspect since he allegedly owned the house that they were illegally confined, plus both of them positively identified him. In his tiny house, the investigating officers also exhumed the body of a woman with some parts missing. Matheri later claimed that he committed the evil act as part of a cult he had been forced into by Bishop Jeremiah Paranjo, and in return he would get ransom amount of money. So, who is Geoffrey Matheri? Geoffrey Njoroge Matheri was born in 1982 in Nakuru County. He was the second born in a family of 5. Little is known about his early years. However, according to Matheri's later claims, he says that his childhood was marred by a couple of horrific incidents. At a tender age, both of his parents died, which made him, together with 4 other siblings, relocate to Kinangop, where they stayed under the care of his grandmother and his uncle. While in Kinangop, life was very tough. Matheri says that his uncle used to mistreat them, and when the situation became unbearable, he dropped out of school and fled to Naivasha. In Naivasha, he joined the teeming numbers of street children who sniffed, grew, begged for food, and slept in culverts. This pattern repeated itself for several years, and then one day, a man approached them while they were relaxing under a tree. The man, who he identified as Bishop Jeremiah Paranjo of New Hope for All Nations Church, asked who among them was ready to have a better life, leave the streets, go build their own house, and live comfortably all the days of their life. Matheri claims that among all those who were present, he was the only one who accepted the offer. He then left with the bishop, and he got to live with him for a month. It was within this 1 month of living together that the bishop explained to Matheri what was the task at hand about. He was to kill people, drain their blood, and if they were female, he had to cut off their breasts, and if they were men, he had to chop off their genitals, and afterwards deliver the said body parts and blood to the bishop. He claims that at first he refused, but later he changed his mind when Bishop told him how much he was willing to pay for the role. And so Matheri went back to Naivasha in Kihoto slums, where he rented a small house in readiness for his new job. He recruited 6 other street kids who would help abducting and delivering victims to him. Days later, he stumbled to his first victim, Miriam Wairimu, who he killed, drained her blood, cut off her breasts, delivered to the bishop, and then he buried her under his bed. On August 19, 2008, at about 7:30 p.m., Naomi Wanjiru, a resident of Naivasha, was going to the shop to buy a packet of maize flour for dinner. On her way, 2 street boys appeared in front of her. They proceeded to greet her and continued to the direction that she was going. Few minutes later, another 2 appeared behind her. The 2 who had passed Naomi earlier on started to return, and before she knew it, she was in the middle of the 4. They stuffed her nose and mouth with a strange-smelling piece of cloth, rendering her unconscious before delivering her to Matheri. The mother of 2 later woke up in an unknown location with a tall man sitting beside her. Her legs and hands were tied. Matheri, looking furious, asked her name, and Naomi told him. He then put her up on her feet, cut the ropes, and pushed her forward, saying, and I quote, "Walk." Being terrified, Naomi started escaping, but unfortunately, Matheri caught up with her and stabbed her thigh. He then proceeded warning her that he would stab her to death if she tried escaping again. He then led her to a secluded compound with 4 small mud houses and opened one of them. He violently pushed her inside, and as soon as she entered the house, she heard the faint sound of someone crying and asking for help, and she immediately noticed that she was not alone in the house. Naomi said that at first she was relieved that she wasn't alone, but again shocked that the attacker had done this to someone else. Matheri locked the door behind him, walked to the bed, pushed the other victim to the wall, and ordered Naomi to sleep beside him. She cooperated, but Matheri went ahead to tie her legs and hands before sleeping between the two victims. In the morning, when Matheri woke up, Naomi felt a sudden sharp pain on the right side of her face, and she immediately blacked out. Few minutes later, when Naomi regained her consciousness, she found herself under the bed and still tied, but the kidnapper was not around. She crawled and pushed herself out from under the bed when she saw another lady on the bed, who she would later identify as Esther Akinyi. Esther, a 16-year-old woman, had been abducted and illegally confined in the house by Matheri. She had been in the house for 4 days. In the midst of their conversation, Matheri walked into the house and picked a yellow metal cup and 3 empty soda bottles. He picked a huge knife, stabbed Naomi, and pressed her blood into the cup. When all this was happening, Esther was screaming and crying for help when Matheri mercilessly beat her. He then proceeded to biting off flesh from Esther's back and drank Naomi's blood like one who was eating bread and downing it with tea. This is a picture of Esther's back that was taken after she had been rescued. The deep bite marks, amongst other injuries, demonstrated the kind of torture and cruelty that she went through in the hands of Geoffrey Matheri. After feeding on Esther's flesh and drinking Naomi's blood, he then drained more blood from Naomi using a syringe and filled the 3 empty soda bottles before delivering them to Bishop Jeremiah at his church between 7 p.m. and midnight. However, Matheri's evil acts would not go on for so long, because on 14 August 2008, at about 11 a.m., Esther Akinyi noticed that Matheri failed to lock the door like he used to. Despite being badly wounded, she gathered enough strength and escaped straight into the hands of residents of Kihoto slums in Naivasha. After rescuing her, they noticed that she kept pointing to a small house that she had appeared to just have come from, since she could barely speak. At the same time, some residents started to shout and scream, which prompted Matheri, who was around the compound, walk direct to the small house and realized that Esther had escaped. Furiously looking, he quickly took Naomi outside the house near a borehole, where he had dug a hole, which he told Naomi that it was to be her grave. He then commanded Naomi to say her last prayers on earth, and as soon as she completed it, he took her to the corner of the plot and made her lie down where he had placed a big stone in readiness to chop off her head. When all this was happening, the furious residents walked into the compound and began searching the first house, but unfortunately, they found no one. They then moved to the second house to search it too, when they heard a man's voice and immediately followed the sound. As soon as they turned the corner, they saw a man holding a huge knife and stepping on a pale-looking woman lying on the ground next to a freshly dug grave. They shouted and ran towards them, but Matheri took off and managed to escape. The 2 women would later be identified as 16-year-old Esther Akinyi and 21-year-old Naomi Wanjiru. They were then rescued and taken to hospital, but by the time of their rescue, Naomi was pale and her wounds were not bleeding. She seemed to be already dead. On the other hand, Esther was already rotting. Days later, the two started recuperating well, and now they could explain whatever had happened to them. Surrounded by media cameras, some of their relatives, and investigative police officers, Naomi, looking terrified, began explaining to the police how they had been kidnapped, assaulted, and their blood drunk and flesh eaten in a ritualistic-like manner. She spilled all the beans about everything she had seen Matheri do to them, as the investigations and the manhunt for Matheri began. When the crime scenes were searched, the police recovered blood-stained mattresses, school uniforms for girls, whips, knives, among other items. In the house, the investigative officers also exhumed the body of a woman with some parts missing. The body was taken to Naivasha District Hospital, where the investigations to determine who it belonged to started. Matheri was later arrested on August 15, 2008 from a hotel in Naivasha. After his arrest, he confessed to have killed about 50 women and over 100 men from Nairobi and Nakuru between January 1, 2008 and August 14, 2008. He said that he would kidnap his victims, drain their blood, chop off some of their body parts, feed on the flesh before disposing the remains. In his confession, he said that he delivered blood and body organs to Bishop Jeremiah Paranjo of New Hope for All Nations Church, and in return, he would be paid handsomely the money he used to buy a plot and 2 matatus. Bishop Jeremiah Paranjo was arrested thereafter, and surprisingly, he denied all the things Matheri had said about him. He maintained that the only relationship they had with Matheri was that of a street boy and a pastor and nothing else. After investigations, he was released since nothing could directly link him to the crimes committed by Matheri. On that September 2008, Geoffrey Matheri was arraigned in court for the first time. He was charged with 4 counts of rape, assault, and unlawful confinement. However, in 2011, a Naivasha court acquitted him of rape and assault charges because the prosecution failed to produce enough evidence, and that is the P3 form, which is a document presented in court as evidence in cases of rape and assault. He was then sentenced to 4 years behind bars for the unlawful confinement charge. He then proceeded to serve his term at the Naivasha Maximum Prison, but before he completed it, he was also charged with the murder of the woman whose body was found buried in his house. The investigators identified the body to be belonging to Miriam Wairimu. The prosecution, through a postmortem report, proved that the cause of death was extensive hemorrhage due to multiple cuts and stab wounds. The trial for this case began on June 16, 2013. This murder case was a lengthy one and had very unsatisfying conclusion because the prosecution failed to prove that the remains really belonged to Miriam Wairimu. According to Kenyan law, in murder cases, unless the death of the person is proved beyond reasonable doubt, it may be likely that the accused may be charged with the murder of a person who is still alive. For Miriam Wairimu's murder case, there was no proof that the human remains really belonged to her. Also, there were no any relatives to identify the body, no police report of her disappearance, or any missing persons report, no DNA match from any family member that was produced to court as evidence. Lack of evidence by the prosecution would, however, set Geoffrey Matheri free, since it was also evident that the prosecution solely relied on Matheri's self-confession to impute guilt on his case. According to Kenyan Law Section 25A of the Evidence Act, the circumstances in which a confession may be admitted as evidence in court, Section 25A1 provides that a confession or any admission of a fact tendering to the proof of guilt led by an accused person is not admissible and shall not be proved against such person unless it is made in court before a judge, a magistrate, or before a police officer other than the investigating officer, being an officer not below the rank of Chief Inspector of Police and a third party of the person's choice. The recording of the confession video involved Geoffrey Matheri giving self-incriminatory evidence in violation of his right as highlighted by Article 50 of the Kenyan Constitution 2010, which states that every accused person has the right to a fair trial, which includes the right to refuse to give out self-incriminatory evidence, and such evidence is not admissible unless the accused had first been properly warned and had made an informed decision to waive that right. This was not done when Matheri was recording his confession, and therefore the court could not impute guilt on Matheri regarding Miriam Wairimu's murder. Also, the prosecution failed to prove that Matheri owned the specified house, since there were other 3 houses next to it which were vacant. There was also no eyewitnesses who saw Matheri burying the deceased in that particular house. With all these mistakes, the prosecution failed to link Matheri directly to the murder, and he was acquitted on the murder charges by Magistrate Maureen Odero of the Nakuru High Court on July 29, 2016, and afterwards he was set free. What's your thought on Matheri's case? Do you think the prosecution made the right decision when they released him back to the society? Please comment down below. There ends the story of Geoffrey Matheri. Tell me what you all think of this episode down below, and if true crime content is your kind of vibe, please consider subscribing, and until next time, bye bye.